They say 40 is when a woman finds her power. But for me, it was the night I realized my husband and my sister were living off my sacrifice. I paid the bills. I worked the nights. And at my birthday dinner, I brought proof they never expected. But what I found after that dinner was far worse than cheating. The gold-trimmed clock in our mahogany-paneled living room felt like it was counting down to my own execution. At 40 years old, I had climbed the corporate ladder until my feet bled, securing a partner position at the city's top law firm just to ensure my family wanted for nothing. My husband, Terrence, was the stay-at-home father who handled the domestic front. Or so I thought while I was putting in 80-hour weeks to fund our luxury lifestyle. Then there was Monica, my sister since college, the woman who had a key to my house and a permanent seat at our table. She was always there when I got home late, offering a glass of wine and a listening ear, telling me how much Terrence appreciated my sacrifice. I felt a deep sense of security, believing I had the perfect support system to balance my high-pressure career and my role as a mother. I never questioned why she started showing up in silk robes that looked remarkably like the ones I bought myself, or why the guest room always smelled like her expensive, floral hair oil. I was too exhausted by the demands of the firm to see the subtle shifts in the atmosphere of my own home, the way the air grew thin when I entered a room. But as I reached into the back of our shared hall closet to find my birthday shoes, I found a designer bag I didn't recognize. Inside was a receipt for a diamond necklace dated 3 weeks ago, paid for with our joint credit card, but the necklace wasn't around my neck. I held that receipt in my trembling hand, the thermal paper feeling like a hot coal against my skin as the first seeds of a dark realization took root. When I confronted Terrence about the charge later that evening, he gave me a look of such wounded innocence that I almost apologized for even asking. He claimed he had bought a gift for his mother's 65th birthday and used the joint card because his personal account was low that month. His voice was steady, filled with that smooth, comforting baritone that had convinced me to marry him 15 years ago. Yet my intuition was screaming. I wanted to believe him so badly that I pushed the suspicion into the back of my mind, labeling it as work-related paranoia and exhaustion. Monica arrived shortly after, draped in a new pashmina, her eyes sparkling with a secret joy that didn't match the somber mood of the rainy Tuesday evening. She hugged me tight, her scent of jasmine and betrayal clinging to my clothes, and told me she had a huge surprise planned for my milestone birthday dinner. I looked at her, searching for a flicker of guilt in those familiar eyes, but all I saw was the polished mask of a woman who had mastered the art of the long con. I went to bed that night feeling like a stranger in my own sheets, the silence of the house amplified by the rhythmic ticking of the clock downstairs. I lay awake for hours, wondering why the man who claimed to protect my heart was suddenly keeping his phone face down on the nightstand. The weeks leading up to the big celebration were a masterclass in psychological warfare, as I began to notice the tiny fractures in the foundation of my reality. I started noticing that my night shifts at the firm, those late-night sessions preparing for trial, were being treated as a convenient schedule for someone else's extracurricular activities. I found a strand of long, synthetic hair on the back seat of Terrence's SUV, a shade of honey blonde that belonged to Monica, not to my own natural, dark curls. When I mentioned it, he laughed it off, saying he'd given her a ride to the grocery store because her car was in the shop. My professional life as a lawyer had trained me to look for the evidence that people tried to hide, and I applied those skills to my own marriage with a ruthless efficiency. I hired a digital forensic expert to recover the deleted messages from our home computer, and what I found was more devastating than any physical affair could ever be. They weren't just sleeping together. They were laughing at me, calling me the ATM, and the workhorse, who was too busy being a boss to be a real wife. Monica had even suggested that once I turned 40, Terrence should file for divorce and claim half of my partner earnings, and the house as alimony. They were planning to move her into my bedroom, to raise my children in the house I paid for, using the money I earned while they were in my bed. The level of calculated cruelty was staggering, a poison that seeped into my soul and replaced my heartbreak with a sharp, diamond-hard focus for revenge. I watched them interact at the dinner table, their friendship appearing so seamless and supportive, while I knew they were counting down the days until my financial ruin. I began to quietly move my personal assets into a private trust that Terrence couldn't touch, and I started documenting every cent he spent on his mistress. I found receipts for expensive dinners, hotel rooms, and even a down payment on a small condo in Monica's name, all funded by my hard work. I was the one who worked the night shifts, who dealt with the stress of the courtroom, while they played house with the fruits of my labor. I waited until the day before my birthday to finalize the last piece of the trap, a document that would change their lives forever. I know most of you listening have faced a situation like this, where the people you carry on your back are the ones plotting your downfall. Have you ever felt that gut feeling, that someone was in your house or your bed while you were out working? Tell me in the comments if this has happened to you, or if you've ever felt it. I want to hear your story. The night of my 40th birthday dinner arrived, and the atmosphere in the private room of the city's most expensive restaurant was thick with a deceptive, celebratory joy. I wore a red dress that cost more than Terrence's car, a symbol of the fire that was burning inside me, and I stood at the head of the table like a queen. My family was there, my children were smiling, and sitting right next to my husband was Monica, looking like the cat that had finally caught the canary. Terrence stood up to give a toast, his voice filled with a practiced warmth as he spoke about my strength and how much I meant to the family. He talked about our 15 years of marriage as if they were a sacred bond, all while his mistress was wearing the very diamond necklace I had found the receipt for. I watched the guests clap and cheer, their faces blurred by the intensity of my focus on the two people who thought they had successfully fooled me. I smiled, a slow, predatory grin that didn't reach my eyes, and I told the room that I had a special gift for everyone to commemorate this milestone. I handed out small, elegantly wrapped boxes to the guests, but for Terrence and Monica, I had something much larger and far more significant waiting under their chairs. The room went quiet as I picked up my glass, the crystal clinking against my wedding ring with a sound that felt like a final bell at a boxing match. I looked at Monica, then at Terrence, and I realized that the gift I was about to give them was the one thing they weren't prepared to receive: the truth. As Terrence reached for the envelope I'd placed in front of him, he didn't realize that his entire world was about to be served on a silver platter. "Open them," I said, my voice cutting through the soft jazz playing in the background like a razor through silk, and the sound of tearing paper became the soundtrack of their downfall. Terrence's face drained of all color as he pulled out the photographs of him and Monica at the condo, their bodies entwined in a way that left no room for his lies. The guests gasped as the photos circulated, the images of betrayal striking like lightning bolts in the middle of what was supposed to be a joyous, family celebration. Monica tried to stand up, her face a mask of indignation, but I leaned over and whispered for her to sit back down if she didn't want the police called immediately. I explained to the room that while I was working my night shifts to provide for my family, my best friend was working overtime to steal the man who slept beside me. I described the embezzlement, the secret condo, and the messages where they mocked my hard work, my voice remaining as calm and steady as if I were arguing a case in court. My mother-in-law began to sob, and my brother stepped toward Terrence, but I waved him back, wanting the full glory of this moment for myself. I told Terrence that I had already filed for an annulment based on fraud, and that the investment he thought he was making was actually a one-way ticket to poverty. I watched as the reality of their situation began to sink in, the smugness on Monica's face replaced by a desperate, panicked look as she realized her ATM was closed. The dinner was over, but the feast of my revenge had only just begun, and I was savoring every single bite of their public humiliation. The room was a chaos of hushed whispers and shocked glances, but I remained the eye of the storm, centered and cold as I watched my former life dissolve into ash. I turned to Monica and asked her if the diamond necklace was worth the loss of her reputation, her career, and the 40 years of history we shared as sisters. She tried to claim that she loved him, that I was too busy for him, the classic excuse of a woman who lacks the character to build something of her own. I laughed, a sharp, hollow sound that made several people at the table flinch. And I told her that she was welcome to him now that he was worth absolutely nothing. I informed the table that Terrence had signed a prenuptial agreement that specifically cited infidelity as a reason for the total forfeiture of any marital assets or alimony. He looked at me with a mixture of shock and hatred, realizing that the quiet, hard-working wife he thought he knew was actually a legal shark who had teeth he never felt. I had spent the last month quietly moving every cent of my earnings into accounts he couldn't access, leaving him with only the debt he had accumulated on his secret credit cards. He was now a 40-year-old man with no job, no home, and a mistress who was only interested in him as long as his pockets were full of my money. The guests began to filter out, unable to bear the weight of the tension, leaving me alone with the two people who had tried to bury me while I was still breathing. I stood up, smoothed my red dress, and told them that they had 5 minutes to leave the restaurant before the security I'd hired escorted them out to the street. Walking out of that restaurant, the cool night air felt like the first real breath I had taken in months, a liberation from the heavy shroud of deception that had covered my life. I drove home to my quiet, empty house, the house that was now legally mine alone. And I sat in the dark, allowing the silence to wrap around me like a protective cloak. I realized that the pain was still there, a dull ache in my chest that no amount of revenge could fully erase, but it was tempered by the pride of my own resilience. I had spent my 30s building a world for everyone else, and now at 40, I was finally going to build a world that belonged only to me and my children. I spent the next few days changing locks, blocking numbers, and meeting with my legal team to ensure that the divorce was as swift and surgical as my birthday reveal. Terrence tried to call me from a burner phone, begging for a second chance, claiming that Monica had bewitched him, but I simply hung up and added the recording to my evidence file. Monica was fired from her job after the photos I've sent to her HR department surfaced, proving she had used company time and resources to conduct her secret affair. They were both learning that when you play with a woman who has spent her life mastering the law, you should expect to be judged by the highest standards of justice. I felt a sense of closure beginning to form, a bridge between the woman I was and the woman I was becoming. A woman who would never again be blinded by loyalty. But just as I thought the worst was over, a courier arrived at my office with a package that contained a secret even I hadn't uncovered during my investigation. The package was a simple manila envelope with no return address, and inside was a single USB drive and a handwritten note that said, "You only scratched the surface, Evelyn." My heart skipped a beat as I plugged the drive into my computer, my fingers hovering over the keys as I prepared myself for another wave of betrayal, or perhaps a new mystery. The files on the drive were dated back 10 years, showing a series of offshore bank accounts in my name that I had never opened and never authorized. I realized with a jolt of horror that Terrence hadn't just been stealing my current earnings. He had been using my identity to launder money for a third party for over a decade. The stay-at-home dad persona was a front for a sophisticated financial scheme that involved people far more dangerous than a disgruntled mistress like Monica. I looked at the names on the transactions, names of people my law firm had represented in high-stakes criminal cases, people who would kill to keep their secrets hidden. I wasn't just a betrayed wife. I was a potential target for a federal investigation because of the man I had allowed into my heart and my home. The $10,000 I thought was for a condo was just a drop in a bucket that held millions of dollars in illicit funds, all tied to my social security number. The fear that washed over me was unlike anything I had felt at the birthday dinner, a cold, paralyzing terror that my career and my freedom were now in jeopardy. I realized that my revenge had poked a hornet's nest that was far larger than I ever imagined, and the sting was going to be lethal if I didn't act fast. I sat in my office until the sun began to peek over the horizon, the glowing screen of my computer illuminating the blueprint of my husband's true life. Terrence wasn't just a cheater. He was a criminal mastermind who had used my professional reputation as a shield for his illegal activities for nearly half our marriage. I found a folder labeled Insurance, which contained recordings of my private conversations and copies of my firm's confidential files, meant to be used as blackmail if I ever caught him. The betrayal was so total, so absolute, that I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were reading about a stranger's life instead of my own tragic reality. He had been prepared for this day, for the moment I would find out about his infidelity, and he had a kill switch, ready to destroy my career to save himself. I realized that the birthday dinner wasn't the end of the war. It was just the opening skirmish in a battle for my very life and the safety of my children. I had to decide whether to go to the authorities and risk being implicated, or to find a way to use Terrence's own insurance against him and his dangerous associates. I felt a heavy weight in my chest. The realization that the man I had slept next to for 15 years was a monster who had been feeding on my life like a parasite. I looked at the photo of us on my desk, taken on our 10th anniversary, and I saw the lie in his eyes that I had missed for 5 long years. As I moved to delete the files, a message popped up on the screen from an encrypted account, telling me that they knew I had the drive and that I had 24 hours to return it. The threat was clear, a cold reminder that my victory at the restaurant had put me in the crosshairs of people who didn't play by the rules of the courtroom or the heart. I spent the next few hours in a fever of activity, not as a victim, but as a strategist who had spent her life winning against the most ruthless opponents the city had to offer. I contacted a former colleague who now worked for the Department of Justice, someone I knew I could trust with my life, and I laid out the entire story from the beginning. We met in a crowded diner at 4 a.m., the smell of burnt coffee and grease providing a strange comfort as I handed over the USB drive and the evidence of Terrence's crimes. I told him everything. The night shifts, the affair, the birthday dinner, and the offshore accounts that bore my name without my consent. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and respect, promising to protect me and my children while they built a case against Terrence and his associates. I felt a small flicker of hope, a tiny light in the darkness of the last few weeks, knowing that I wasn't fighting this battle alone anymore. But I also knew that Terrence wouldn't go down without a fight, and that he would use every weapon in his arsenal to take me with him into the abyss. I returned to my house, which now felt like a fortress, and I waited for the clock to strike the deadline the encrypted message had given me. The silence was heavy, filled with the ghosts of the life I had lost, and I realized that at 40, I was starting over with nothing but my integrity and my children. The deadline passed without a knock at the door, but the tension in the house was so thick it felt like I was walking through water every time I moved from room to room. I received a call from my lawyer, informing me that Monica had been arrested on charges related to the embezzlement, and that she was already starting to sing to reduce her sentence. She was blaming Terrence for everything, claiming she was a victim of his manipulation, a desperate attempt to save herself that I knew would ultimately fail. I felt no joy in her downfall, only a profound sense of exhaustion at the sheer scale of the wasted years, the wasted trust, and the wasted love. Terrence had disappeared, his car found abandoned at the airport, and a manhunt was underway to find the man who had turned my birthday into a national scandal. I sat in my garden, watching the children play, and I wondered how I would ever explain to them that their father wasn't the hero they thought he was. I realized that the most difficult part of the revenge wasn't the public reveal or the financial ruin. It was the quiet, daily task of rebuilding a sense of safety for my family. I had to be the strong black woman once again, but this time, I was doing it for the right reasons, with my eyes wide open to the reality of the world. I felt a new kind of strength growing inside me, a steel that had been forged in the fire of betrayal, and tempered by the cold reality of the law. I was 40, and I was finally free of the lies that had been suffocating me for a decade, even if the price of that freedom was higher than I ever expected. A week later, I was called into the Department of Justice to give a formal deposition, and as I walked through the halls of power, I felt a sense of belonging I hadn't felt in years. I was no longer the workhorse or the ATM. I was a key witness in a major federal case, a woman of substance who was helping to bring down a criminal network. I saw the fear in the eyes of Terrence's associates when I walked into the room, the realization that they had underestimated the wife of their former partner. I gave my testimony with a precision and a clarity that left no room for doubt, systematically dismantling the defenses they had built over 10 years of illicit activity. I felt a surge of pride as I spoke, the power of the truth flowing through me like a river, washing away the shame and the pain of the birthday dinner. Terrence was caught 3 days later, trying to cross the border with a suitcase full of cash and a fake passport. A pathetic end for a man who thought he was a king. When I saw his mugshot on the news, I didn't feel anger. I felt a profound sense of relief that the monster was finally back in his cage where he belonged. I returned to my law firm, where I was greeted with a standing ovation by my colleagues, who had been inspired by my courage and my commitment to justice. I realized that my career wasn't over. It was just beginning a new chapter, one where I would use my power to protect other women from the kind of predators I had survived. My 40th year was turning out to be the most significant year of my life, a time of profound transformation, and the ultimate reclaiming of my own narrative. As the dust settled on the legal proceedings, I found myself sitting on my porch, watching the sunset with a glass of wine and a sense of peace that I hadn't felt since I was a child. I had successfully defended my assets, protected my children, and seen justice served to the people who had tried to destroy me for their own gain. Monica was sentenced to 5 years, and Terrence was facing 20, a fitting conclusion to their partnership of greed and deception that had cost me so much. I realized that the night shifts had actually been a blessing in disguise, providing me with the financial and professional resources I needed to survive the storm they created. I was no longer defined by my role as a wife or a friend, but by my own achievements and the legacy of strength I was leaving for my children. I started a foundation to help women who had been financially abused by their partners, using my own story as a catalyst for change in a system that often leaves victims behind. I felt a deep connection to the community of women who had reached out to me, sharing their own stories of betrayal and resilience, and I knew I was part of something larger. At 40, I was more beautiful, more powerful, and more certain of my worth than I had ever been in my 20s or 30s. I looked at the stars and whispered a thank you to the universe for giving me the gift of the truth, however painful it was to receive at first. But as I turned to go inside, I saw a familiar car pull up to the curb. The same car I had seen Monica hiding months ago, and my heart began to race. The car door opened, and a young man stepped out. A man who looked so much like Terrence it was like seeing a ghost from 15 years ago stand in my driveway. He approached the porch with a hesitant step, a folder in his hand that mirrored the one I had used at my birthday dinner, and he looked at me with eyes full of tears. "My name is Marcus," he said, his voice a younger version of the man who had ruined my life, "and I think I'm the reason Monica was blackmailing your husband." He opened the folder to reveal a series of letters my own mother had written to Terrence years ago, letters that revealed I wasn't the person I thought I was. The secret birthright I discovered at the dinner wasn't just about money. It was about a biological connection to a family I never knew, a family that Monica was also a part of. The betrayal wasn't just a simple affair. It was a decades-long struggle over an inheritance that my mother had tried to hide to protect me from the people currently in the car. I realized that the war wasn't over, and that the secret in the red folder was just the beginning of a mystery that would take me far beyond the walls of my home. My 40th year was going to be the year I discovered who I truly was, and the battle for my identity was only just beginning in the shadows of the night. As Marcus handed me the letters, I saw a shadow move in the back seat of the car, and I realized that someone else was watching us from the darkness. The ultimate truth was still waiting to be uncovered, and I knew I would need every bit of my strength to face what was coming next.